Beneath the crushed hull of a silvery dropship, the ash was still warm. Jackson Vance stepped over the scorched debris, the sharp grit of silicates grinding against his left boot hinge. That sound, a mundane scrape against scavenged plating, felt deafening in the graveyard of Authries 7. The fires had burned low. What remained of the alien city looked like the shattered ribs of a colossal beast. He found her leaning against a twisted bulkhead. A silvery female, tall, her pale skin mapped with bioluminescent lines that flickered erratically, bleeding out a dark silver fluid into the dust. Jackson stopped. He watched her chest heave. He recognized the tension in her shoulders, the way she didn't look for an escape route, and realized she wasn't planning to fight. No, she had already accepted the end. She just closed her golden eyes, waiting for the human to finish the job her own people's preemptive strike had started. Instead, Jackson reached to his collar. He twisted the locking seal. Cold, metallic air hit his sweat-damp hair as he pulled his helmet off. He tossed it into the dirt. Then, he dug into his thigh pouch and pulled out a small, battered cylinder. A bio-stitch ampoule. If you want to see how one choice changes the entire galaxy, hit subscribe, and let's keep exploring. Jackson knelt. He kept his hands slow and visible. "I'm not going to kill you," he said. The universal translator clipped to her collar hummed, translating the rough, human vowels into the fluid, silvery cadence. Her eyes fluttered open, not in panic, but in a profound, quiet dread. She stared at the human insignia scratched into his armor. He pressed the bio-stitch ampoule against her side. The device hissed. Nanofibers immediately went to work knitting her torn flesh together, the dark silver blood halting its slow crawl. "You speak," she whispered. Her voice was tight with pain. "Yeah, we do that sometimes," Jackson muttered, rocking back on his heels. "Name's Jackson. Today's been bad enough, so let's skip the part where we pretend I'm a monster. You spare me. Humans do not spare. We do, just not when we're scared." Hours later, the crushing silence of the battlefield was replaced by the low thrum of humming generators. Vailio woke in a small, reinforced room. Weapons lined one wall, neatly arranged. Tools and half-built devices cluttered another. Jackson stood by a console patched together from alien and human parts, his sleeves rolled up, hands deep in the exposed machinery of a power unit. "You're awake," he said. He didn't turn around. She sat up, wincing as a dull ache radiated from her side. "You could have killed me while I slept." "Yeah, but that would have been rude." She studied him. The rigid control her people valued so highly was entirely absent in his posture. Yet, he wasn't chaotic. "I am Vailia," she said softly, "a strategic liaison for the Silthri Vanguard. My people believe humans are uncontrollable, violent beyond reason." Jackson finally turned. "And your people invaded our colonies. Burned them to the ground. We believed you would destroy yourselves eventually. We chose to act first." Jackson stared at her for a long moment. Then he let out a tired, bitter laugh. Before he could respond, the shelter's pale lights flickered. Once, twice, then held. A subtle vibration shuddered through the floor plating. Scanning pulses. "They're searching," Vailia warned. Her bioluminescent lines dimmed to a pale slate, an involuntary physiological stealth response. "If they find me with you, they will assume collaboration. They will erase this grid." Jackson stared at the holographic map flickering to life on his console. The alien energy signatures were sweeping dangerously close. He tapped a few commands, rerouting power to a device she hadn't noticed before, a hybrid structure of human scrap and alien crystal. He smiled. It wasn't a comforting expression. It was the look of a man deciding exactly how loud to be. 3 unmarked mercenary vessels dropped out of fold space, their drives screaming as they descended toward the shelter. They weren't Silthri. They were scavengers, smelling the blood of a diplomatic pause. Warning sirens howled. Vailia's bioluminescent lines surged to a jagged, blinding white as her internal physiological pressure spiked. She locked into a rigid battle stance, calculating the immediate vector of their destruction. Jackson didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for a heavy manual lever beneath the console. The smell of old copper wiring heating up filled the cramped space. "Good thing I'm not trying to hold," he said. He slammed the lever. The ground shuddered. The outer plating of the shelter unfolded like mechanical petals, sinking into the ash to reveal massive, buried conduit rings. Because nobody ever looks at the rubble. The mercenary ships fired. Searing beams of phase energy struck the grid, but instead of shattering the shelter, the beams bent. They slid harmlessly along the redirected magnetic fields, curving back up into the blackened sky. Jackson tapped the broadcast array, opening a wideband channel to the attacking ships and every listening alien satellite. He sent a single, disruptive data pulse. Not a bomb, a system override. Above them, the mercenary vessels went entirely dark, drifting powerless in the atmosphere. Ethelgard did not burn. The untouchable Silthry capital world, a planet wrapped in probability fields and towers of living crystal, opened its airspace to a single, battered human drop shuttle. Violia had insisted. The Silthry High Council demanded her return, and she refused to go without the human who had spared her. Jackson stood in the vast, glowing council chamber. Dozens of Silthry elders stared down at him. He kept his hands in his pockets. He felt the weight of their calculation, the centuries of rigid control, trying to make sense of a species that refused to follow the rules of war. Before the eldest could speak, the chamber's alarm shrieked. A rival empire's fleet, having watched the earlier broadcasts and sensing Silthry distraction, dropped out of fold space right above the capital. They fired immediately. Instead of a unified military counterstrike, the galaxy watched in absolute silence as thousands of scattered human civilian craft, mining barges, and scavenged freighters simultaneously rerouted their communication arrays and old lasers into a massive, decentralized net of interference, absorbing the rival fleet's energy and dispersing the lethal strike into a harmless aurora of static across the upper atmosphere. The rival fleet, stripped of their momentum and utterly confused by an enemy that fought like a fluid rather than a wall, retreated into the void. The council chamber was completely silent. The eldest Silthry leaned forward, the glowing patterns on his face shifting to a steady, calm blue. "You do not seek domination." "No," Jackson replied, looking up at the crystal ceiling. "We seek survival with options." Jackson sat in the shuttle's cockpit, the quiet of a galaxy exhaling pressing against the hull. He pulled up his Vanguard post-mission log. Beside the datapad sat the spent bio-stitch ampoule. It was no longer a desperate measure for a bleeding enemy. Jackson tapped the screen, officially reclassifying the Silthry Empire as partners.